We are used to thinking that this is for our own good. Every time you pull a small booklet with your photo from your pocket or bag, you sincerely believe that it confirms your identity and protects your civil liberties. They don't teach this in school, and it's not customary to discuss it in polite society, but right now, this very second, a piece of paper controls you. You don't even notice how you pay for it every day with your freedom, your time, and your labor. Look at your hands. Feel the beating of your heart. You are alive. You exist in the material world. But for the system around you, this means absolutely nothing unless you have a document confirming this obvious fact. Who decided that you must prove your right to be on this planet? At what exact moment in history did we voluntarily surrender our right to existence to a soulless, bureaucratic apparatus, allowing it to decide who among us is real and who is not? We were born absolutely free people in the physical world, but artificially, step by step, we were resettled into a cold world of paper phantoms. As soon as you lose this thin piece of cardboard or piece of plastic, you are instantly erased from the system. You can no longer buy food at the store because your bank accounts are immediately blocked until your identity is verified. You cannot rent housing, cannot get a job, cannot even seek full medical help. Physically, you stand before the official. You breathe, you speak, you demand justice. But for him, you simply do not exist. Your flesh and blood are absolute nothing compared to the missing blue seal. This is an astonishing illusion, a grand, all-encompassing deception that has been built right under our noses for generations. Unbeknownst to ourselves, we have ended up in a scenery where the inalienable right to life has been replaced by a permission to live, issued from above. And the most terrifying thing is that we ourselves carefully keep the keys to our own cage, fearing to lose them more than our own freedom. The deeper I dug into this topic, the more terrifying the picture became. The official version of what is happening crumbles to dust as soon as you start asking the right, uncomfortable questions. From early childhood, we are told that total population registration, passports, identification numbers, and birth certificates appeared exclusively for our safety, to protect our basic rights and guaranteedly provide us with the benefits of modern civilization. But this is not care. This is absolute control. Let us recall what the world looked like before this paper trap snapped shut completely. Just a few centuries ago, a person was completely autonomous and competent. His status in society was confirmed by his specific deeds, his honest word, his real physical presence in the community. People freely crossed vast continents, founded new settlements, traded, formed alliances, and created families without asking anyone's written permission on stamped paper. A person was the source of right simply by the fact of his birth on this land. Your name was your honor, and your presence was irrefutable proof of your legal existence. You didn't need an intermediary in the form of a government clerk to prove to a neighbor or merchant that you were really you. But then a silent, creeping linguistic substitution occurred, which almost no one wanted to notice. The concept of inalienable right was very carefully, through laws and regulations, replaced with the concept of a temporary privilege issued by the state apparatus for good behavior. What was initially presented to the population as sincere help turned into rigid, uncompromising surveillance. The right to free movement across the planet became a travel permit that can be revoked at any second with a stroke of a bureaucrat's pen. Freedom to act and create turned into a paid license to carry out activities. We didn't even notice how our own words and concepts turned against us. This pattern repeats with frightening precision if you look closely at the chronology of the introduction of this registration system in different corners of our planet. As if according to one detailed manual, with a difference of just 10 or 20 years worldwide, strict laws on mandatory registration of civil status acts began to appear synchronously. Take, for example, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. In 1836, a monumental law on the registration of births, marriages, and deaths was passed there. The official motive, loudly proclaimed from the high rostrums of Parliament, collection of statistical data and improvement of national health care. It sounds incredibly noble, doesn't it? Who in their right mind would oppose the health of the nation? But at exactly the same time, as if by an invisible signal from a global conductor, absolutely similar directives begin to be aggressively pushed through in other sovereign European states, and then on other continents. By the end of the 19th century, the system of total registration had covered almost the entire so-called civilized world. People were made to sincerely believe that without an entry in the registration ledger, their child does not legally exist and is thus deprived of any protection from external threats. This was the first, most important, and fateful step toward creating your paper phantom. The birth certificate became the very first oppressive contract that you physically signed with the vast system, even before you could speak and completely unaware of what was happening around you. At that very moment, cold bureaucracy created your perfect legal copy, a corporate fiction that has since incessantly acted on your behalf in all official instances. The system began to view a living person not as a free soul, but as a standardized legal entity, a paper being upon which fines, levies, penalties, and taxes can now be endlessly imposed. Imagine the true scale of this global psychological operation. If someone in the 16th or 17th century were told that to cross a bridge, visit a neighboring city, or legally sell an apple grown with their own hands, they would require, in mandatory fashion, a special paper with watermarks issued by a distant ruler, that person would consider you insane. Previously, a person possessed a useful craft, and that was his main and only document. If a village blacksmith could forge strong metal, his high mastery was obvious to everyone around. It never occurred to anyone to demand a written license from him to engage in blacksmithing. His impeccable reputation was his only guarantee. But the new growing system does not need strong, independent masters. The system desperately needs weak, dependent clients. This is why, at the turn of the centuries, parallel to the introduction of universal registration, the mass compulsory implementation of licenses and paid permissions for professions begins. Suddenly, it turned out that your real skills mean nothing if they are not properly certified by an official government seal. Competence, carefully passed down from father to son for many generations, was cynically declared illegal unless it passed through the rigid filter of state control and taxation duties. This was a crushing blow to human autonomy. People were artificially made weak by instilling in them the idea that without official approval from above, they no longer have the right to apply their talents to sustain their own lives. We voluntarily lined up in hours-long queues to get a piece of paper confirming that we were not worthless. Isn't this a genius, devilishly cunning scheme for subjugating an entire species? If you ask the perfectly logical question of why this colossal architecture of subjugation was built, the answer will turn out to be frighteningly prosaic and mathematically precise. Follow the financial trail. This entire complex system was created solely to make a person an eternal debtor, a lifelong and absolutely dependent client who is obligated to pay simply for the right to physically exist in this material world. This is a genius, unprecedented in its scale mechanism for monetizing the very fact of your birth and existence. Your paper phantom is not just a fictional legal construct lost in government archives. It is your personal cash register that works around the clock to enrich hidden elites and massive corporate monopolies. Have you ever wondered why every certificate, every document, every strict reporting form costs money, your time, and your efforts? You pay state fees for issuing a passport. You pay for the right to drive a car. You pay for the paper permitting you to build a house on the land you already bought with your earned money. In essence, you personally pay for the very cage in which you sit. The official version continuously claims that all these collections go exclusively to maintaining social infrastructure and ensuring public order. But this soothing mantra crumbles to dust as soon as we closely examine the historical facts and analyze the real financial flows. The true, hidden goal of all this bureaucracy is to sever a person from free natural resources and force them to buy what originally belonged to them by inalienable right. Let us go back a bit in time and look at a telling historical example that triggered a chain reaction across our entire planet. We are talking about a large-scale economic process known as the Enclosures, whose peak fell at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th centuries in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. For millennia, ordinary people freely used vast communal lands. They grazed their livestock there, grew food, cut wood for building sturdy houses and heating during winter colds. The land was the main source of absolute human autonomy. No crisis could starve you to death as long as you had direct access to nature and knew how to work with your hands. But then something unthinkable happened. As if by a wave of an invisible conductor's baton, thousands of strict parliamentary acts are passed that suddenly declare communal lands the private property of a narrow circle of selected individuals. Millions of free laborers were brutally and categorically expelled from their native places simply because they did not have the right paper with the required wax seal. The physical reality that family generations had lived and honestly worked on this land for centuries was instantly destroyed by cold paper reality. The legal written title to ownership outweighed human life itself. People, suddenly deprived of the basic resource for survival, turned into a huge army of rightless paupers. They were forced in crowds to go to overcrowded, dirty cities and sell their labor for pennies on the factories of those very people who took their native land from them. It was precisely at this dramatic moment that the first global artificial monopoly on life was created. You were deliberately deprived of the ability to provide for yourself independently, so that they could then monopolistically sell you food, clean water, and a roof over your head in exchange for your absolute obedience and your lifelong penal labor. However, simple physical seizure of natural resources turned out to be insufficient for total control. In order for the invisible cage to snap shut completely, the system needed to irrevocably tie your daily labor to your paper double. Thus was born and implemented the concept of direct taxation of individuals' income, which today seems to us something absolutely natural, inevitable, and right. We have become so accustomed to giving a significant part of our earnings to unknown officials, sincerely believing that this is our honorable civic duty. But the historical truth is that it was far from always like this. For centuries, taxes were collected primarily from goods crossing borders en masse, or from items of unprecedented luxury. Taking a share from the fruits of the daily, hard labor of an ordinary craftsman, peasant, or worker was long considered an unthinkable absurdity and a direct, brazen encroachment on personal freedom of will. Everything changed radically at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. With frightening synchronicity, cloaking themselves in lofty words about national security and the urgent need to finance large-scale state projects, governments of dozens of different countries began aggressively introducing direct income taxes. Soon, this practice, like a virus, spread to all continents, covering the absolute majority of industrially developed states. As if someone methodically and purposefully rewrote the rules of the game worldwide, fitting fragmented humanity into a single, rigid standard of financial slavery. And it is precisely here that your individual paper phantom steps onto the historical stage in all its frightening splendor. To efficiently collect tribute from hundreds of millions of people, the global system needed a perfect, fail-safe tool for total accounting. It is impossible to control a free, living person who works in one city today and tomorrow goes to seek fortune on the other end of the continent. But it is very easy to control his registration number. The mass emergence of individual tax numbers and mandatory identifiers became that very key mechanism that irrevocably tied your physical energy to dry state accounting. Who benefits from this? Look for the answer in the financial reports. It benefits those same hidden elites, corporations, and huge financial institutions that, through a convoluted system of state tenders, subsidies, and endless debt obligations, pump colossal masses of your tax deductions into their own pockets. You don't even notice how you pay daily for your own enslavement. Your paper phantom is not only obligated to deduct a percentage from every legally earned penny, it physically cannot make a single significant transaction without prior system approval. Do you want to sell the harvest grown with your own hands? Get a special certificate and buy a permit. Do you want to transport your goods to a neighboring city? Issue a complex waybill and pay the road toll. Do you want to leave your rightful home to your own children? Pay the predatory inheritance tax. Generously pay for the services of the state registrar, appraiser, and notary. Every step you take, every independent action, is tightly covered by an invisible financial tribute. Understand the main thing. This is not care for product quality. This is not maintaining law and order and safety. This is rigid, cold-blooded, and calculating control over any distribution of goods. An artificial scarcity of opportunities is created, in which absolutely any independent action is declared illegal if it has not passed through the filter of the bureaucratic machine and brought it guaranteed profit. You are guilty by default, and your presumption of innocence is just another beautiful myth that we were forced to believe to preserve the illusion of freedom. We have come to the most incredible and large-scale scam in human history, which finally cemented the absolute power of soulless paper over living human flesh. Try for a moment to forget everything they so diligently taught you in school, discard the imposed stereotypes, and ask yourself one simple but extremely uncomfortable question. How exactly did it happen that you ended up locked within the borders of a certain territory, like in an invisible but incredibly sturdy pen? We are absolutely accustomed to considering state borders, customs posts, and strict passport control as something eternal, immutable, and completely natural. From early childhood, we were instilled with the idea that it has always been this way, that this is a basic condition for the existence of any civilized society. But the historical truth, hidden behind tons of bureaucratic dust and rewritten textbooks, is that total control over people's movement is a frighteningly recent invention. Before the beginning of the 20th century, the world was fundamentally different. A free person could board a huge passenger steamer in London without hindrance and disembark on the shore in bustling New York or sunny Buenos Aires without having a single official identity document. Your physical presence, your professional skills, your willingness to work honestly, and your earned money were your only and absolutely sufficient passport to any point on the globe. This incredible personal autonomy brought hidden elites into genuine, unfeigned horror. A mobile population, not rigidly tied to anything, is a population that is fundamentally impossible to control and exploit on a constant basis. If a local ruler imposed too high taxes or introduced insane, suffocating laws, people simply gathered their modest belongings and left for new, free lands. To stop this natural process of free movement and lock the workforce in place, the system needed to irrevocably chain a person to a specific territory. And they decided to do this not with crude iron shackles that could provoke immediate rebellion, but with elegant paper chains. The ideal pretext for this global operation was the First World War. In 1914, governments of the largest powers around the world, as if colluding and acting according to a single script, synchronously introduced unprecedentedly strict restrictions on crossing borders. From high rostrums, people were solemnly and existally promised that this was exclusively a temporary measure, dictated by the harsh necessity of wartime, an attempt to catch cunning foreign spies and fugitive deserters. Take as a vivid historical example the British Nationality and Status of Aliens Act of 1914. This law, for the first time, made the possession of a standardized passport a strictly mandatory condition for any legal border crossing. The frightened population submissively agreed to sacrifice their centuries-old freedom for the security promised by the state. But the main, unspoken rule of any bureaucracy states, there is nothing more permanent than a temporary government decree. When the guns finally fell silent and the smoke cleared, the temporary checkpoints did not disappear anywhere. On the contrary, they quickly turned into impregnable concrete walls, and the temporary paper passes became a strictly mandatory attribute of everyday life. The official version about protection from imminent military threats instantly crumbles when you horrifyingly realize that after the end of the global conflict, these strict control measures were not just preserved, but multiplied many times over in all countries of the world simultaneously, regardless of whether they were in the camp of victors or among the defeated. This was a stunningly synchronous global capture of humanity into a bureaucratic trap. The culmination of this process of monopolizing freedom of movement occurred in 1920. Under the auspices of the recently created League of Nations in Paris, a special international conference on passports and customs formalities was convened. Just think about the chilling absurdity of what was happening. A tiny group of never-elected diplomats, high-ranking officials, and representatives of hidden financial elites gathered behind closed doors in luxurious halls to forever change the rules of physical existence for billions of living people. It was precisely there, at this landmark conference, that the single global passport format was officially approved and rigidly standardized. They meticulously specified the exact size of the paper booklet down to the millimeter, the exact number of pages, the strictly mandatory presence of a standardized photograph, seals, and stamps. At that very historical moment, your paper phantom acquired its final, physically tangible form, unconditionally recognized at the international level. A living person of flesh and blood was cynically reduced to the pathetic role of a mere biological carrier of this sacred document. Our vast, beautiful planet was artificially sliced into isolated administrative zones. Your inalienable, innate right to freely walk the land of your ancestors was legally stolen, so that it could then be monopolistically sold back to you in the form of a temporary visa. A paid privilege graciously issued by the sovereign for good behavior and payment of duty. You don't even notice how you constantly pay huge sums of money just to be graciously allowed to move your own physical body from one geographical point to another. But restricting basic freedom of movement was only the first stage of the ruthless closing of the cage. The global system critically needed to make you voluntarily, with a joyful smile on your face, surrender all your personal data and forever tie your physical survival to the state apparatus. How to make a free, self-sufficient person voluntarily enter themselves into a lifelong registry of accounting and become an eternal debtor. For this, the most insidious and vile linguistic substitution of concepts in history was used. Total accounting and control was beautifully named touching care and social protection of vulnerable segments of the population. Let us turn to indisputable facts and specific dates. In 1889, in the mighty German Empire, Chancellor Otto von Bismarck introduces the world's first system of mandatory state pension and social insurance. The naive working class rejoiced, sincerely believing that the mighty state had finally turned its face to them and decided to protect their old age. But the reality hidden behind the beautiful speeches was completely different. Bismarck was an extremely pragmatic politician who made no secret of his rigid conservative views and was infinitely far from selfless charity. This unprecedented system was created with one single, deeply thought-out goal: to forever destroy the centuries-old financial autonomy of the large family and the local independent community. Up to that fateful moment, people always relied on mutual assistance from their numerous relatives, on their strong, unbreakable ties in the local community, on their own material savings and real physical assets. This made them incredibly strong, united, and absolutely independent of any whims of central authority. Mandatory state insurance became that very destructive wedge that the system mercilessly drove between generations. It legally forced every legal worker to obtain a unique identifier, to stand on rigid, continuous financial accounting, and to monthly give a significant part of their hard, physical labor into the bottomless, opaque state pot. In return, a living person received only a shaky paper promise that the system might take care of him after several long decades. This was a genius, legalized financial pyramid that irrevocably tied a person's physical survival to the stability and favor of the bureaucratic apparatus. This destructive pattern repeats with frightening mathematical precision. Over the next 30 to 40 years, absolutely similar laws were synchronously adopted, as if by a wave of a magic wand, in dozens of countries around the world. The United States of America, with its Social Security Act of 1935, numerous European states, countries of Latin America, all of them, as if on command from an invisible conductor, began compulsorily introducing mandatory social insurance numbers and individual tax accounts. Your paper phantom rapidly grew new, incredibly strong financial chains. Now, without this cherished number, you physically could not legally get a job, could not receive basic medical help, could not open a regular bank account. You were finally and irrevocably turned into a standardized statistical unit, an obedient, manageable asset on the enormous balance sheet of the state, which is obligated to bring guaranteed, uninterrupted profit to its hidden owners throughout its entire biological life. Colossal, incomprehensible flows of funds taken from you flowed directly into the hands of monopolies and giant financial institutions, which cynically use your own money to strengthen their absolute power over you. Do you think this is care? No. This is cold, mathematically precise economic pressure that created a world where you are an eternal debtor simply by the fact of your existence. Losing this number, this single piece of paper, you are erased from reality, losing access to the money that the system collected from you all your life. You are no longer a human. You are an error in the system code, subject to immediate elimination. We are approaching the most important moment in our investigation, that very turning point when the invisible cage finally and irrevocably snapped shut. This is the culmination of the grand bureaucratic plan that forever turned us from full-fledged masters of our own lives into a managed resource. Let us call it the Quiet System Reboot. This was not a mythical worldwide flood or a sudden natural cataclysm. This was a total, global change of the basic rules of the game on our planet, where humanity was imperceptibly transferred to the status of submissive staff and standardized goods. For this transition to take place, it was not enough for the architects of the new reality to simply entangle us with taxes and paper passports. It was vitally necessary for them to physically tear us away from our natural skills, deprive us of age-old knowledge, and make us totally, critically dependent on corporate monopolies. A self-sufficient person capable of independently building a sturdy house, growing healthy food, and healing their family represents an existential threat to a system built on endless consumption and profit extraction. Therefore, the system began systematically and brutally to criminalize human self-sufficiency itself. And the main weapon in this invisible war was again the ordinary dry paper with the blue state seal. Let us carefully look at how they took away our basic right to our own health and physical well-being. For many millennia, the art of healing was an open, accessible practice. Knowledge was carefully passed down from generation to generation, and healers bore direct, personal, reputational responsibility to their community. But at the beginning of the 20th century, a coordinated and ruthless takeover of this vital sphere by giant financial institutions occurs. In 1910, the infamous Memorandum is published, generously funded by the largest industrial monopolies of that time. Under the plausible pretext of standardization and improving the quality of education, this document launched a global wave of mass closure of independent schools. Just 10 years later, around the world, as if copied verbatim, the strictest laws on mandatory licensing of medical practice began to be adopted. From then on, no one had the legal right to treat people or produce healing compositions without official permission issued by the state bureaucratic apparatus. Practical skills, deep multi-year experience, and real results instantly ceased to matter if they were not backed by the proper diploma and expensive license. This was not care for the health of the nation. This was a brilliant, cold-blooded operation to create an absolute monopoly. People were artificially made weak and helpless by instilling in them the dogma that their body no longer belongs to them, and the keys to health are exclusively in the hands of licensed specialists and huge corporations. You can no longer decide for yourself. You need a paper permit to your own body. But the enslavement process did not even think of stopping there. To make your paper phantom fully subjugate your physical reality, the system needed to deprive a person of the inalienable right to freely dispose of their own land. Recall how your distant ancestors built their homes. They simply chose a suitable place, cut down the forest, kneaded clay, and erected sturdy walls that reliably stood for centuries and served as shelter for entire generations. They were absolute, full-fledged masters on their land. But in 1916, in one large western metropolis, the first comprehensive resolution on zoning urban territories is adopted. Under the pretext of caring for urban planning, aesthetics, and citizen safety, this insidious law, for the first time in history, prohibited the landowner from building on it what he considers necessary, without multi-stage approval from officials. This bureaucratic plague spread with frightening speed across all continents of our planet. Over the next 2 decades, in virtually all industrially developed states, the most complex building codes, convoluted rules, and strictly mandatory permits for any work were introduced absolutely synchronously. You suddenly woke up in an absurd world where, To simply nail a new board to the roof of your own house, you are required to buy a special paper from the state, hire a certified inspector, and pay a series of hidden fees. Your private property overnight turned into a fiction, a beautiful illusion, existing only in legal directories. You are no longer the true owner. You are merely a temporarily registered tenant, to whom the mighty state graciously allows the use of a piece of the planet, on the condition of complying with thousands of absurd rules and paying taxes. We were systematically deprived of any resource of autonomy. We were weaned off growing food by introducing strict production quotas and prohibiting free seed exchange. We were forced to forget traditional crafts by burdening any manual labor with prohibitive licensing fees. We finally turned into dependent consumers. Our paper double became incomparably more important than our true essence. This global trap snapped shut with a deafening sound when we voluntarily agreed to exchange freedom for illusory, fictitious comfort. And now this paper phantom, this soulless legal construct, has absolute power over where you can sleep, what you have the right to eat, and how exactly you are allowed to treat your own children. You give this phantom the best years of your life, just to buy the right to continue physical existence in this artificial matrix. Your labor, your energy, your dreams, all of it is now processed into endless streams of data that settle in the dry accounting books of a huge, ruthless system. And the most terrifying thing in all this is that we no longer remember what it is like to be truly free. People who do not ask anyone for permission to live. The official version of reality crumbles to dust as soon as you realize that laws, taxes, licenses, and scarcity of opportunities were introduced not for order, but for the total fixation of your position as a dependent asset. We are the staff in a theater of the absurd, where rights have been replaced by permissions and freedom by a service. This was not a coincidence or a mistake of history. This was a cold, mathematically precise global project. We were erased from the status of owners of the planet and entered into the registry as debtors of the system.